Well, let's bring in three members of Parliament now to discuss all of this. From the foyer of the House of Commons, we're joined by James Bezan. He's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence. Jack Harris is the Defence Critic for the official opposition NDP. Ralph Goodale is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. Mr. Bezan, we heard today at the Conference of Defence Associations Institute meeting today that some information about how much of the spending of the Defence Department and CSIS and the RCMP has been handed back to the government over the last 7 years, $11 billion in total, because the money wasn't spent. And I guess in this era of increased security measures, why would that be?
Well, as with everything, as we learn and as we go along here, procurement is not always a simple measure, and so sometimes dollars aren't spent because projects are coming in behind schedule. This is not only happening here in Canada. We see it around the world, and other NATO allies are experiencing the same delays. So that's where you see a lot of these dollars being returned, especially in national defense file. But at the same time, we have been able to continue to move ahead on procurement and continue to provide the equipment that's required for the Canadian Armed Forces, so the brave men and women who serve us so valiantly every day have the equipment they need to do the job that we task them with.
But okay, so are you saying then that look at these numbers for what they are, and you're saying none of that has affected the government's efforts to provide more security for Canadians, either through CSIS, the Mounties, or DND?
Look, we're still providing all the frontline policing, all the services we need for having an effective Canadian Armed Forces. You know, we're continuing to buy the equipment. Like we're still getting new C-17s. We got new labs. We got new Leopard tanks. We have, you know, equipment continuing to be procured, and there's still more in the works, like new ships and Arctic patrol vessels, new surface combatant vessels. So all this is still in the queue and moving ahead. And sometimes, as we've seen with helicopters, maritime helicopters, for example, those things get delayed. Okay. But we are accepting some of the new helicopters this year, and we'll start retiring the Sea Kings later this fiscal season.
Mr. Harris, what's your reaction to these this unspent money?
Well, there's two things going on. One is unspent money, as James is focused on, and that's part of that is incompetence in replacement of the fixed-wing search and rescue aircraft, for example, the failure to handle the issue of the supply ships that should have been built starting in 2008 and those things. But the real problem here from a security perspective is that the budget of CSIS, the military, and the RCMP have been cut in every year since 2012. We've got a 20% cut in the RCMP. They don't have the resources to do their job that they need. Engagement with communities, which is a very important matter in dealing with the de-radicalization program. They don't have the resources to do that. Communities have been asking for it, can't get it. And the budget of CSIS is down as well. So, you know, let's not just say that this is all about procurement. It's not about that. It's about this government wanting to do everything it can to squeeze money out of the system so that they can have an alleged balanced budget in the spring at the expense of security and come up with this bill like they have before the House now, which is really about the political dimension that your panel was just talking about.
Mr. Goodale, what's your view of this?
Well, there are several dimensions to the spending issue, as discussed today at the Conference of Defence Associations. To start with, they point out that for DND alone, there's something over $7 billion that was announced by the government, approved by Parliament, and not spent according to Parliament's instructions. That's 23% of the budget that was allotted under that particular vote number 5, as it's called. That is a very significant difference between what Parliament was told was going to happen and what actually happened. If it was a % or 2 or 3, one could understand. It's 23%.
Right,
That's a massive mistake.
Why do you believe it's happening, and what does it mean?
Well, it indicates a high degree of incompetence within this government. If you're missing your budget allocations, if you're missing your estimates by 23%, that is a huge mistake. And it's not all just procurement. The Conference of Defence Associations had a very interesting thing to say about that today. On procurement alone, they said all trust and faith between the players in the system has been lost. And you remember the Auditor General and the Parliamentary Budget Officer a few years ago talking about the CF-35 procurement, proposed procurement, described that as both incompetent and deceitful. on the part of the government.
All right, Mr. Bezan, what's your response to that?
Well, first of all, let's remember that through the Deficit Reduction Action Plan that we did institute, all the savings that we were able to find were actually in back office costs, and we actually still have as many soldiers on the front line. We've actually been able to continue to recruit. We have as many police officers doing the jobs that they need to be doing, and they have the equipment they need. That has not been affected one bit. And if you know, Ralph wants to talk about missing budget targets, and that's being incompetent, then how does he explain the whole time that he was finance minister under the Liberals, where they missed every damn budget they had?
Did not. Absolutely did not.
Why do you think we brought in a parliamentary budget officer?
We brought in 10 consecutive surplus budgets, and brought down debt, brought down taxes, and delivered to Canada the best fiscal record in the Western world.
You spent all the money on your own pet projects.
Hang on a second.
You are in Never Never Land.
Okay. Mr. Harris, quickly, and I want to move on.
It's very interesting that James Bezan would bring up the parliamentary budget officer, because the parliamentary budget officer, who was supposed to advise Parliament, is not getting any information from this government. In fact, the PBO said yesterday that they stonewalled them, that they refused to give them information in violation of the Parliamentary Budget Officers Act.
Right, and we saw the numbers today, Mr. Harris, from the Department of Defense through Mr. Kenny, the detailed spending of the $122 million for the mission in Iraq. Anything surprise you there?
Well, nothing surprises me except the fact that the minister put it out on Twitter after the department for 6 months, and the Prime Minister and the previous minister saying you will get this information 90 days after the mission through normal budgetary process. Well, I don't think Twitter is a normal parliamentary process, and if they really had confidence in those numbers and wanted us to have confidence in them, they'd supply that information to the parliamentary budget officer, let him analyse them, and see whether they're accurate as an independent officer.
There didn't seem to be anything particularly complicated in the numbers Mr. Kenny put out today of how the $122 million was accrued. Why not release that to the parliamentary budget officer as the process moves forward?
Because there was some concern about where we were operational tempo, how you target those numbers. These are very accurate, what we have in the estimates now, and we're very comfortable. And they were tabled this morning, and the minister then provided extra details through social media, as well as doing a statement that he released to the media. So everything was done in a very open and transparent. And I can tell you, we appreciate the parliamentary budget officer's report, and your
numbers they're not that far off with what the parliamentary budget officer said.
Not at all.
But so I guess the questions still remain: if the PBO's job is a serious one, why not provide that information as you're going along, just as I guess it was being recorded by DND?
Because there were certain things that they wanted that one we weren't sure of at National Defense. They were still, you know, we had ebbs and flows happening in how many sorties the CF-18s were flying. And the biggest cost that we do see in this is the cost of aircraft and ammunition. Yeah. Those are the biggest part of this. And that was where you know, from day to day you really don't know what you're doing, and because you're still out there. Their rotors are out there selecting targets, working with our allies, and it's just a matter of determining, you know, how operational tempo is being set.
Mr. Good, I want to bring you in here because I move on to talk about the extension of the mission in Iraq. Looks like that's going to happen from everything I can sense coming from the government. Are the Liberals prepared to reconsider supporting an extension of the mission, having voted against the current mission?
Well, we don't have a proposal from the government at this stage. It is very important for there to be complete transparency and candor and honesty in the way that the government describes the mission. We know there was a misdescription in the first place. Whether it was deliberate or accidental remains determined, but the government described it as entirely a non-combat role. They would not be accompanying other forces into battle. In fact, that turned out to be in, and that's a serious mistake on the part of the government. They did not explain honestly to Canadians what was going on. Secondly, we've had this dispute. Money, and we'll see at the end of the day what the accurate figure is on it. But we need to have honest information so we can make an of what has happened.
Okay,
and
but
we
I'm trying
also
to get
need.
so there is a chance you would support an extension of the mission.
We don't have a proposal
Okay.
yet until we see what the government is actually suggesting.
Okay.
Are they suggesting continuing on just as it is? Are they changing the mission? Are they in some way retreating from the mission? We'll need to know that before anybody can make an honest assessment.
All right, Mr. Bezan, quickly to you here. There's some suggestion that Canada may take a deeper role in Iraq, providing perhaps lethal weaponry or something more than that. What can you tell us about that?
Well, we're looking at all options and contingencies here, you know, in the estimates that we table today. We note the fact that, you know, if we decide to stay, then there's going to be extra costs. If we decide to take down camp and bring everybody back home, there's extra costs tied to that. So, you know, we're planning for all options at this point in time, but you know, there will be some discussions at the department level, and then ultimately at cabinet, and then a motion for Parliament to consider as to what those details are. Those discussions are taking place now.
I'll finish with you, Mr. Harris. Where do you think we might be headed here in Iraq?
Well, it's unclear, as Mr. Bezan says. I haven't decided yet, but what we've been extremely concerned about what Canada's role is here, and one of the things that we talked about at the beginning was the significant danger that refugees were in. I had lunch today with the Turkish ambassador, who explained how they are now feeding 2 million refugees, 200,000 inside Syria, 100,000 inside Iraq, and 1.7 million in their own territory. They've spent $5 billion on it. They got about 265 million from the international community is all. These refugees are in serious danger. This is something that Canada could and should be doing about that. We need to hear more about the whole plan as to how this is moving forward. Everybody is outraged by the actions of ISIL. We know that there's 60 nations involved. The question is, what's Canada's proper role here?
And you know, Peter, that we are one of the biggest donors providing humanitarian aid. We know that this is a whole basket approach, but we will continue right now we don't have the support of the opposition parties in going in and fighting the ISIL threat, because this is a genocidal organization. And I was glad to hear today at the technical briefings that the Canadian Armed Forces are saying that we've at least stopped the flow of ISIL troops coming from Syria to Iraq, and we've been able to gain more territory back and protect civilians who have been the targets of this genocidal group.
The greatest danger on the ground remains those refugees that are not tended to. And in order for there to be a long-term solution to this awful, awful problem, you need to win the hearts and the minds of the victims of ISIL. And that's where Canada could play a very important role by doing something significant on the humanitarian side.
All right, appreciate your time with me this evening. We'll continue to follow this debate, of course. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.